You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I am the founder of the Offshore Lab. I am deeply passionate about sustainable innovation, effective project delivery, and technology-driven solutions that serve people and empower communities. So in Africa, I believe that we need to create inclusive tech ecosystems where even the smallest communities have access and are empowered. I am quietly optimistic. I see the investments in this space, in infrastructure and technology infrastructure, and I just really hope for more of it to get us to where we really should be as a country and as a continent.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find inspirational people who are doing inspirational things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have Emeka Obiwulu, who is the founder and CEO of the Offshore Lab, which is an integrated service company focused on driving innovation and developing local capacity. Welcome to the podcast, Emeka. How are you?
I'm very well, Tessa. Thank you very much for having me.
How's your week been so far?
It's been all right, really. Just another week out here in Lagos. The typical struggles and all of the opportunities that come on the flip side of that. So far, so good.
So hopefully we can brighten up your week with the conversation today. It's a conversation I'm looking forward to. So before we get started, I was hoping you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Emeka.
Thank you very much again, Tessa. And I am indeed looking forward to the conversation. I'm Emeka Obiwulu. I was born in the old Anambra State in southeast Nigeria. I am the second of 5 children. I've got 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and we grew up a close-knit unit, with the odd 1-2 years in between us. And we were basically raised by both parents who were teachers, and that just got instilled a lot of discipline and value of education from a very young age. And I think growing up in a household that really valued education and community had this lasting impact on me. Fast forward to today, I'm married with 2 boys, and much of who I am today comes from yesterday's foundational experiences. Like you pointed out, I am the founder of the Offshore Lab, and I am deeply, deeply passionate about sustainable innovation, about effective project delivery, and technology-driven solutions that genuinely serve people and empower communities. I've had so far, I'd say, in my own words, a fulfilling career in both onshore and offshore project delivery across a few continents, and working on projects that range from, I think I've done a lot of energy infrastructure and more recently, a lot of community empowerment. These varied experiences shaped to a certain extent my understanding of how very impactful, well thought out projects can actually be in uplifting individuals as well as entire communities, especially when people are empowered with and given the right tools and the knowledge, to sustain, not just for survival, but to sustain them. My focus, my drive today is on transforming communities, African communities, by empowering them with the tools and the skills that these communities need to thrive. My work is a journey to fundamentally create enduring impact, and the Offshore Lab is a crucial part of that mission.
You've given us great insights into your professional and personal life. You mentioned things such as discipline and education, and your life is a journey that has led you to where you are now. So I was hoping you could share with us what actually led you to founding the Offshore Lab. What was the vision behind the company?
So fundamentally, the Offshore Lab was born out of my desire to tackle the high failure rate of projects around, Nigeria and Africa. My journey started over 2 decades ago when I ventured into engineering and project delivery on a global scale. And working on diverse large-scale projects exposed me to, strategic frameworks and advanced technologies. But through all that, my real passion was always to apply that knowledge, back home in Nigeria, because I saw immense potential here, but I also saw challenges, pressing challenges. And that's what inspired me to return and focus on unlocking what I considered, huge potential by creating local solutions that are tailored specifically to our own unique environment. So we often have initiatives that could uplift communities, and I see them fall apart due to the short-term thinking, the lack of strategic project planning, and the complete lack of, in most cases, local integration. So with the Offshore Lab, I just set out to create this platform that was completely different. On the one hand, a platform that champions sustainable project delivery, the local prioritization, community involvement, and that strong commitment to sustainable impact, and we just had this vision to create this vehicle on this other hand that was empowered to deliver every level of a project or every phase and stage of a project, so that we had our destiny in our own hands. So we had this one-stop shop. That's why we keep going about it, being an integrated service company, where we could deal efficiently with all the front-end risk assessments, the design, the front-end stakeholder management. And, when we have that, and very importantly, all of the work that's done to enshrine a sustainable design with sustainability embedded completely in that project, define our benefits actualization, the beneficiaries, and how we want to measure it. So we have that in-house, and then we move to the implementation. And we also have under the same roof all of what you need from a solutions ecosystem to implement a project in that sense. So we have put the engineers, the construction managers, the people who work on site, the field engineers and the likes. And then the third prong of that is also having that vehicle that also has the ability to run all levels of benefits actualization, including the maintenance and sustainability of that project. So that is the different sort of vehicle we created. So our vision for TOL was simple, but quite ambitious if you listen to it. And it is to be a leading force for technology-driven social change all across Africa, making communities, not just recipients or beneficiaries, but active participants.
Fantastic. From what you've said, it's clear that you're passionate about sustainable project delivery. You're also quite passionate about technology infrastructure. So I know you've had quite a long and varied career, but how has your global experience shaped your perspective on the role of, say, technology infrastructure in Africa's development?
The most important lesson I can say I've taken away from my time working, and I actually try to propagate that when I do my mentorship and deal with people through our Junior Lab initiative, is I learned that technology isn't a silver bullet by any means. Technology is supposed to be an enabler. So it's all about the context. It's all about, first of all, having the individuals who understand the context of their local problems, their unique problems, prior to applying those enablers like technology. So the magic really happens when technology is adapted to or for local needs and realities. So in Africa, I look at it and I believe that we need to create inclusive tech ecosystems, where even the smallest communities have access and are empowered. So really, my global experience has showed me the power of inclusive tech, and that's the kind of essence that we bring to every project that we deliver at the Offshore Lab, every initiative that we create, every, we say every group STEM, outreaches, hackathons, whatever we bring in, we try to enshrine that first element of understanding that technology in this context should be an enabler, but we need these individuals who can think, create, and make for tomorrow. And through that critical thinking, first and foremost, immersing themselves in the environment, understanding what those problems are before going forward to proffer solutions for them with the enablers like we have, like tech.
As you mentioned, technology is an enabler. So what role do you believe technology can play in enabling your commitment to, I guess, something we've discussed in the past, in abandoning that short-termism in African project delivery?
A lot. So I look at technology as kind of like building roads, if to put it that way. And this time, if you think of it that way, think of it like digital roads. So I think it's very important, as a country and as a continent, that we invest in technology for the huge roles that it plays, and it will play for our future. Working ourselves from the position that we are. When we invest in technology, like we try to at the Offshore Lab, put a lot of emphasis on it in what we believe the catalyst it can be to liberating and empowering communities. What you're really doing is that you're creating pathways to these critical elements of education, healthcare, commerce, and the route for good governance to reach the typically underserved demographics. So you have lots of examples where, for instance, with Junior Lab, where we literally say we're growing STEM from the grassroots, which is democratizing STEM, tech and STEM education, and taking it to these areas that are typically bereft of the conversation. So what you end up having is growing a group of individuals who take leadership or who become leaders of thought in our typical problems in Nigeria of agriculture, energy, manufacturing, and digital innovation. So it has that huge role to play. We have a responsibility to invest in it, technology, and these are the things it can actually enable for national and continental development.
So if we keep to the theme of investing in infrastructure technology, from your experience, how have you seen investing in technology infrastructure act as a catalyst for economic growth, whether it be in Nigeria or different parts of Africa?
So an example, for instance, digital connectivity and how we can actually turn a local business into a global one. That's a typical example, right? If you look at our whole Maslow pyramid thing and look at survival for basics, we're trying to first and foremost feed ourselves. And if you look at your small scale farmers and how their struggles with their product yield, their route to market, their perishables, etc. And you use that analogy and you empower that farmer by putting technology in their hands, you have that exponential increase in all of those, right? Simply taking data of, I've got these tomatoes out by March, I've got cassava in April, I've got this, and you have that data from that local farmer who previously was in the silos, and he has that published somewhere where you have off-takers who have a huge demand for this, but have no visibility for that farmer. That simple level of data management and advertising or putting it up on the website, on the web page, has empowered that farmer, increase his potential for his yield, reduce the problems he'd have with perishable goods with the route to market, because he has had off-takers taking it from the point even before they actually reach their maturation age. And this applies to a whole lot of sectors. That's despite my emphasis on agriculture. There's so many examples, particularly with the initiatives that we run. At the moment, you were talking about what's happening in the background. We're running a hackathon for Junior Lab for Chevron. We're 12 public schools. They've brought 12 public schools together, and we've broken down these subjects. We normally call them that four-way grid of agriculture, energy, manufacturing and digital innovation. We look at them as problems of strategic national importance to the continent and to the country, and we develop people in that sense. Investing in that and investing in individuals, that is one assured route of empowerment for both Nigeria and for the continent as well.
I guess it's clear for yourself, it's not just about impact, it's about long-term impact. So how do you go about ensuring that the projects that you do deliver have lasting social and economic value for the communities they serve?
Very important, very, very important question, Tessa. Thank you for that, because we do throw around the word sustainability quite a bit and don't pay collectively enough justice to it and how often we use it. So when you look at projects where we started this conversation, the high rate of project failures, why we started the Offshore Lab, by providing a solution to it, we're saying the projects that we deliver, we start from the design phase to define those beneficiaries and what impact of the project actually means, right? So we move away from celebrating the ribbon cutting as the end of the project. Yes. We actually define the metric as impact assessment. How many people, how many lives is this transforming? Who are the beneficiaries? How long is this happening? So when we build a robust design as the first thing that we do, the robust design that actually adapts to evolving social, environmental, and economic changes to last through a period we regard as the design life cycle, right? So if an asset is supposed to last for 10 years, 15 years, or 25 years, that design we're building we're advocating a financial model and a sustainability model that ensures that it survives and goes through those 10, 15, 25 years without interruption. And this project vehicle doesn't walk away after the ribbon is cut and after the cameras move away, but actually goes through that life cycle. So that robust planning is the first element of it. And then when we build the project, part of what we advocate as well is cross-sector collaboration, because we believe different parties are very specialized in doing different things. And when people bring in, or these different parties bring in their strengths into projects, particularly empowerment projects for communities, the chances of success and ensuring that value is delivered after the project is commissioned is a whole lot higher. So that collaboration between public sector, private sector, and the stakeholders or the beneficiary is something that we advocate strongly and we try to enshrine during the implementation phase of the project. So we think the government must create the right policies, but the private enterprises and the private sector then lend their framework, the transparency, how they actually built up all of their standard operating procedures, their reporting structure to that project to actually give it that resilience or build that resilience, around it. And then the third element of it, or the third leg of that, is the involving stakeholders right from onset in the implementation and delivery. So we then look at focusing on local capacity building, and ensuring that things like infrastructure projects are not just delivered, but they are also maintained by skilled local talent. Because when we talk about local prioritization, there is no point in having, for instance, experts come in and deliver a project like Jakarta Steel or power plant or something similar. And then when they leave, we don't have the local talent to actually operate it or do anything with it. So they point at massive infrastructure investments like that, and they say, the expertise to do it is non-existent, so we can't operate this huge investments. So that third part of it, of ensuring that local prioritization and local capacity building being a critical success factor and part of implementation, is a third part of our differentiators of coming into the project, because we advocate it right from onset. So these are things that we do, or we propose, and we advocate and we push for when we deliver projects to ensure the sustainability of these projects.
Thank you for sharing that. I guess to achieve this is not easy. You slightly touched on this, but what are some of the biggest challenges faced in building these technology infrastructure or delivering these type of projects within Africa and Nigeria?
So I think the elephants in the room, that one of the most obvious ones for us always cost, the affordability and accessibility, so you're always, whether it's from an MDA level, a country level, whatever it is, there's always that scarcity, or you have too little funds chasing too much demand and too many projects and gaps to actually fill. So that's a huge one that can't be understated at all. And that's where what I spoke about before of exploring or being flexible enough to explore different strategies, by getting different stakeholders creatively to deliver this, opens up that net of what is possible. So the affordability is huge. And then when you look at the accessibility, I give the analogy of the farmer there and things like education. Without reliable energy, for instance, there's other things like internet access, digital literacy. You can't really fulfill that demand and that promise. So we at COL, at the Offshore Lab, we address these barriers, by looking for how to bridge these gaps with technology, local innovation, and training. I'll give you an example. If we said we wanted to reach remote communities, and because they are typically underserved, and upskill the homeless kids there in agro-technology or digital innovation, one of the challenges we already face will be the facility where they exist is probably off-grid. So you're talking about how do you even get these computers in there? How do you get the expertise to train them there? And people typically turn away because it becomes too difficult. But technology comes in there and solves that problem, because by getting in just a little bit of the solar panels there built in that facility, you can just get a space or lab and power that lab through the period that you need to run the training. So you already see the problem and what will typically discourage people from intervening in that space because of how high maintenance it seems to be. But a little bit of creative thinking and a little bit more investment in the required technology suddenly brings that place and expands the net to pull in that sort of area of intervention or empowers that community completely. So we create solutions that fit local context, whether it means using solar-powered computers or training or getting trainers in the locality over to any of our facilities, upskill them and get them back into those places that they live and allow them to be the ones who are then championing knowledge transfer in that side. So local capacity development of the beneficiaries as well enshrined in our projects.
Awesome. So I guess you've touched on this in terms of local capacity building being an advantage and also a challenge. So could you share some specific examples of how you integrate the community needs into project designs?
Absolutely. I'd give you a typical example of the project we finished, I think it was second quarter of this year, and that was the project sponsor, shell companies in Nigeria. He set out to build these 100-seat ICT centers across the country. And we're the contractors and we do the project delivery for that. So when I got to Bauchi State, the first time I actually went there and visited the facility, I was met by the acute deforestation going on there, which academically, I just approached it academically. But when I actually experienced it firsthand, I didn't need a second take on exactly what we were going to propose that facility for. So the immediate demands that became clear, the deforestation and the existential climate change threat that we had in that part of that country, it was a no-brainer that whatever technology we were enshrining in that 100-seat ICT center had to prioritize agro-tech and climate tech. So at that point, we took in the local demands and the local problems, and we started creating the army of youth who could start understanding the context of that problem and start creating solutions for it. So one of the things we did in that sense was ask for a plot of land from the Vice Chancellor, and in that plot of land, we planted 1,000 fruit-bearing trees. Now, it wasn't just to plant the trees, we set up a club called, an initiative called Campus Greenbelt. And what we did was obviously the way we always approach these things of taking 2 steps back was, this is the problem we want to solve in this locality, but we want to make it sustainable and we want to make it scalable. So after we go from this Bauchi State University, we want to see that this isn't just planting trees here, but we are creating and helping empower an army of green leaders who will take care of these trees to maturation. And in terms of scaling, it's green belt in the sense that we are planting these across all of the universities in Nigeria. So we went beyond the Bauchi State conversation to say, this is a nationwide problem, and actually a Gulf of Guinea problem as well. But for a nationwide context, let us get this tree planting thing, build the irrigation system, and set up these clubs within the universities, the Campus Green Belt Club, and help them grow capacity, understanding, skill, and take ownership of this problem. They took ownership of the trees planted. They have, each of the clusters of trees have unique owners. The students who you go and hold on to, they read it, they look after it, and if there are any issues, they go onto their database, take pictures, and report it. So this is you understanding the unique problems, and then you identifying key stakeholders, in this case, the youth, who you are inspiring to taking ownership of that there tomorrow, and integrating them into the project as stakeholders who you build their capacity towards understanding the reality of this problem, the criticality of the problem, and giving them the confidence as the people who have that power to solve that problem. And that's what we did with that initiative there. So we tooled the ICT lab. We built an additional appendage in the Campus Green Belt, the orchard with 1,000 trees. And then we brought together, aggregated this group of students who we selected, who could then take ownership of this and inspiring them to become those green leaders of tomorrow, who can solve their local problems and hopefully expand that through the rest of the nation.
This is great. I was hoping you could share more about how you approach developing and nurturing the next generation of, I guess I'd call them, design thinkers in Africa.
Yeah, so that's a very big thing for us. And when we look at that initiative that we actually set up, because it's one thing running things as bolt-ons for projects, but to give us that runway to express exactly what we want to achieve fully, we build our own in-house initiatives. So one of what we did in that sense of engineering the mindsets of tomorrow's leaders who take ownership and being creators and makers is we set up the Junior Lab initiative. And that Junior Lab primarily is creating, making, taking ownership, and being leaders of thought in, first and foremost, those 4 areas I mentioned before, right? So with this initiative, we're going in in 2 phases. First, we're going into these remote areas and looking at every local government as a node of empowerment. So within these local governments, we find clusters of disadvantaged demographics, things like motherless babies, street boys, aggregated or put together under a roof that gives us a seamless entry route. So that's that approach we take. We have actually made some inroads, quite significant inroads, to be fair. We've run this for a year, and one of the pilots we did was in Port Harcourt, Rivers State. It's a home called Badamia Boys, Badamia Boys Home. And it's somewhere that in Rivers State, if you're familiar with it, they go to the streets, they pick up these boys, they bring them to the homes, they give them hot meals, they put a roof over their heads, and then they go out and seek funding for their school fees. So we looked at that as a sort of point that we needed, because it already brings these boys together and makes things easier for us because we have them under that same roof. So we have like 15 of them. So we then went in there and looked at the context. It's the oil producing hub of the country. A lot of what is required around there is engineering, a lot of challenges they have around the environment, etc. So we built a curriculum around our understanding of where the boys currently are, and then crafted a way to upskill them through 1 year of intense academic training with trainers who are fixed in that facility. So we did a 1 year celebration of that, not celebration, but we did the 1 year anniversary of the commissioning, where subject matter experts, project sponsors, because we do that in partnership with companies like NNPC and Shell, etc., who bring the funding for the infrastructure. So they actually came there and saw boys who had never used computers in most cases actually designing complex tools on software like SolidWorks. And they drop an object, you drop your phone, you drop whatever it's, and these boys start designing it and modeling it. And everyone now started understanding all of what we've been talking about of applying or empowering young people in these demographics, in disadvantaged demographic, and pulling them into the net of value for the country. So we started the second phase of that at Badamia Home. And that second phase is now upskilling these individuals from the understanding of theory to the practical implementation. So anyone who's doing product design, because that's a manufacturing hub as far as we're concerned, anyone who's doing product design, machining, forging, welding, now understands the implication of, I want to machine out 2 mm, I want to design this thing to this level of tolerance. So at the end of the second year, which we currently are on, we then want to see these boys who have moved within 2 years drastically from that middle to be leaders of thought, who understand problems from their own context with all of the work we've done with critical thinking, and have the capacity to start designing, developing, and producing tools that solve these problems. So that hub of manufacturing at Badamia Home, we have started work in a place called Daisy Home, another home for previously homeless kids, and that's completely geared towards agrotechnology. So in the same way, the ICT lab is built in there, the curriculum designed for them, the connectivity, the computers, and the trainers. And then we have the experiment area where we do the different things like hydroponics, soilless farming, etc. And we give ourselves those number of years to take them from the point zero-ish where they are to a point where they become close to experts that can solve local problems that are around them.
Amazing, amazing. So this is a great initiative, and it clearly demonstrates how the Junior Lab project contributes to creating future innovators and problem solvers. But I was wondering, in what ways does the initiative contribute to, say, local job creation?
Yeah, so every initiative we undertake at the Offshore Lab is geared towards local empowerment, and that includes job creation. Okay. So if you pick up we talked about Junior Lab now, we go into NYSC, right? And if we say we want to create a Junior Lab in every local government, one of local LGA, one of what we're looking at there is that in these 774 LGAs, if we have, for our first base case, for instance, 2 trainers in there, we're already creating jobs for 774 times 2 trainers. So these trainers are trained, mentored, skilled up, continuous development by the Offshore Lab in that sense. So from that this simple another example is already showing you how we enshrine it in each of these initiatives that we develop. So from a Junior Lab context, this is what we do. From a project implementation context, local prioritization for us already is local capacity building and employment generation. So we're looking at the sustainability of the project has to be managed and implemented by individuals from that locality. So let's use the example of these failed dams and such like, by saying, if at the time of developing those dams, that you actually build the capacity of the individuals who have their families and themselves in that locality, the way they will take ownership of those dams and manage it differ from people who sit very remotely and are not at risk of those things damaging. So that stakeholder buying becomes easier, and the buying into maintaining it a whole lot easier when you go in, build and develop the competent enough capacity during the implementation phase and empower them with the jobs that you create that entail the management of that facility. So whether it's our initiative or whether the projects that we deliver, we are very big on ensuring that jobs, local jobs, are created to empower the individual and empower the community.
Thank you for sharing that. I guess a big theme of our conversation today has been sustainability. And you and I know that an issue that we encounter in the sustainability of projects in Nigeria is that lack of, say, maintenance culture. So how do you go about instilling that culture of maintenance within project delivery, with whether it's the young people that you're working with or the more established professionals in your field?
So a very good question, and I totally agree with you. It's a huge problem, and I don't want to call it a bad culture, but as a lot of people in the business world will tell you, culture will eat strategy for breakfast any day. So, if you, it doesn't matter you acknowledge that it doesn't matter what fancy strategies you come in with. If you have that close to culture there, we have a big problem. And that maintenance thing. So if you look at it from that context, it's really a mindset thing for us. So we when we see that, we think of the solutions to solving that as being creative, and being creative in the sense of having a new norm or a new relationship that has or is enshrined with a culture that is not a poor maintenance culture. And that's where we go back to things like this cross-sector collaboration. So when you have private sector organizations who their existence depends on efficiency, it becomes very difficult to expose that private sector organization for as long as it's part of that sustainability and implementation of a project to the culture of efficiency. So you then borrow or make the role or define the role of that entity in that cross-sector collaboration as driving everything from the maintenance systems, the repair and maintenance, the sustainability through that period. And you just borrow from the frameworks that exist by default of the existence of these private sector companies. So building in sustainability from the word go, from design, is number one. You have to account for all of the challenges you're going to encounter during that project. So if you look at the environment and say, we have issues with corruption, for instance, that's an economic challenge and an economic issue. So you build in the resilience in the project for that. We have issues with climate change. You build in the resilience for that. You have systems that you can actually forecast trends. Building that the next 25 years, these are the possible trends, and this is how I can build resilience for evolving economic issues, environmental issues, climate issues, political issues. All of that get built in from that front end where you design and build a resilient project design. So that's cross-sector collaboration, that's resilient design from one set, doing all that hard work from one set. And the third thing I've said a few times already, which I'm a very big proponent and advocate of, is embracing and engaging local capacity through every stage of the project. I think when you do these three things, you build that resilience that we talk about, that enshrines a culture of sustainability, way long after the commissioning of the project's been completed.
Thank you for that. I totally agree and understand the building in the resilience, but I was going to ask, from your professional experience, why do you think that maintenance culture has often been lacking in the past?
So I think for us, it's really a case of we have to look at projects differently. We have to abandon completely that approach to a project is the life cycle of a project is initiate it, implement it, commission it, and walk away. And when you do walk away with the project implementation vehicle, the project becomes an orphan that's subject to whatever. And if it fails, as most of them do, there's no remediation, and then it gets revisited. So that approach is something that we think is hugely responsible. The short-term approach to projects is hugely responsible for a lot of project failures. Changing that approach, changing that mindset, and changing that culture will, as far as we're concerned and as far as we believe, will catalyze delivery of sustainable projects. And there are instances, a lot of them, where you see where that change in mindset, where people think of projects beyond the commissioning dates and think of it through the life cycle of the project and building all of those necessary frameworks that ensure its sustainability. The project has to have very high chances of success. And that actually has to happen at the planning stage.
I agree. We definitely need to change that short-term approach for the future. So if you look at the future, how do you see the investing in technology infrastructure developing in Africa, say, over the next 5 years?
I think I am quietly optimistic, to be honest. Over the next 5 years, I see more integrated, community-driven approaches to technology infrastructure. I see movement, in the right direction. We talked about how even the technology itself, being an enabler, needs certain enablers. We talked about power infrastructure. We talked about how a gap in that cripples the opportunities for technology. So when I say I see movement and positive signs in that, an example is Mission 300, where the World Bank, African Development Bank, and a few other stakeholders are trying to provide by 2030 electrification to 300 million Africans. We already have that gap that 600 million Africans have no access to electricity. And that's 83% of the world's unelectrified. And that's a huge number and a very disturbing number. And you can already see how that cripples a lot of the conversations that we're having today. But when you say you're being optimistic, you're actually seeing the inroads being made by these large organizations to solve some of these fundamental problems. So if you look at that potential for an initiative like that Mission 300 being successful by 2030, that's a huge catalyst. That's a huge catalyst for infrastructure, huge catalyst for technology, huge catalyst for education and everything that comes with it. So I am quietly optimistic, like I said, and I see already the investments in this space, in infrastructure and technology infrastructure. And I just really hope for more of it, to get us to where we really should be as a country and as a continent.
So looking closer to home, how do you see the Offshore Labs contributing to Africa's progress in technology and sustainable development over the next 5 years?
Good question. Good question, Tarsa. So we already have a few initiatives, ambitious initiatives running. So first and foremost, we plan to scale our initiatives to reach more communities. For the ones that we have and we intend to spread through all the local governments in Nigeria, we want to turn every local government area into a node of transformation. Our goal is to create a continent-wide network of empowered individuals and communities who are actively using technology to solve their unique challenges and by extension, contributing to a more sustainable Africa.
Awesome. So, as we're coming to the end of today's conversation, got one last question.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Yeah, so I'd share one. Say, a tree cannot stand without its roots. So when we talk about community, when we talk about sustainability, the depth of whatever conversation you're having, we look at what we're doing as growing seeds right from the roots, growing trees right from the roots there. We look at our Junior Lab slogan, we call it growing stem from the grassroots, for instance. That borrows from this tree, can't stand without its roots. So we're looking at the depth of how we implement what we implement because we want these trees standing strong. So we don't look at projects, for instance, as building an infrastructure. We look at it as planting a seed and ultimately from the depth growing that tree from the seed. So it becomes this huge, strong, sustainable part of our landscape, that provides shelter and everything else that comes with it.
Thank you for sharing that, Emeka. Very fitting and definitely in line with the great work that you're doing, both professionally or in the private sector and also the community social initiatives that you have as well. It's been a great conversation. Very enlightening. It's great to hear about the work that you're doing, how you're trying to reshape the narrative of project delivery within Nigeria and Africa, and also your plans for the future. So, absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. Absolute pleasure having this conversation with you as well.
Thank you very, very much, Tessa, and hope to speak to you again sometime soon.
We definitely will. Keep in touch and we will speak soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me once again.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.